Welcome to the land of the tropes. Today we're talking about character tropes, aka stereotypes that we have for particular types of personalities. And so, first off, when you think of say an ogre or an orc, what kind of shape do you imagine it? Do you think of a big old cube? Do you think of a triangle? Do you think of a circle? For me, personally, I feel like I would imagine an ogre as more of like a huge, broad rectangle, right? Because they are associated with the traits of being heavy set, large, tall, very formidable. And with a rectangle, you get those very straight lines, very easy to like get really big and flat. Versus, say, if you were to talk about an elf or a witch, maybe their design would be more in line with, say, a thinner rectangle or even just a really thin triangle or something like that, right? And where do we come up with these types of tropes? Well, tropes, the definition being, are just shared conceptual ideas that society and a lot of the people share about how a particular character or personality is perceived as. And so we develop these types of tropes through our exposure to media like movies, manga, games, music, all that sort of stuff. So like when you see the concept of the archetype of a nerd, what are we going to think of? We're going to attribute things like maybe they wear glasses, they're thinner framed, they tend to be more cowardly, so they're going to be hunched over, they're going to maybe have sloppy hair because they don't know how to take care of themselves. Versus, say, if we think about a jock, they're going to be attributed with musculature, good looks, maybe very sociable personality, tall, handsome, etc., etc. And well, why do we even associate these traits with these types of characters? It's because we've seen these types of characters in our own lives, right? We attribute reality into these imaginary worlds because it makes it much more relatable for us as an audience to relate to it. And so let me go through some of like the various shapes that might come up as like a common trope stereotype when it comes to trying to depict a person's sort of personality, right? So as I mentioned before, so I talked about like, say, a big old ogre might be represented by, say, a big old square, a square shape, overall square shape. That doesn't mean like they're actually shaped like a square. It just means their overall design. They're going to be broader, more angular. Maybe something like that. Real rough right now. But you can see how squarish a lot of the features that I've given him to reflect that sort of square shape that we've attributed him to. I'm gonna move this over so we're not touching the edge. Compositionally wise, if things are touching the edge just slightly, it feels like you're tempting, but you're not quite there. All right, versus say maybe a triangle shape. A triangle shape where maybe this is like a girl maid or some other kind of character where they have a really flowy outfit and a whole hat and a witch and everything, that kind of thing, right? And with these sharp angles, you're going to get implications of, say, someone who's more blunt or someone who's a little more callous, that kind of thing. Especially if you're seeing triangle shapes, especially in the face. Like if we're seeing a face that is an upside down triangle, say like this, you're automatically gonna assume that they're a little bit more mean, a little bit more evil, right? This kind of face versus, say, a heart-shaped face, right? Something with rounder features. character with this kind of feature would probably look more innocent, whereas this character with like an upside down triangle is very angular, very sharp kind of thing, is going to look more evil or like scary, right? This over, and you can even see these types of shapes occur in like the eye shape, as I mentioned before when I was talking about individual features. If you have, say, more an angular shape versus a teardrop shape, obviously this one is going to look a lot more angry and more scary looking, whereas this is maybe it's more normal, more realistic, depending on how you shade the sclera. Because right now, if I shade it all black, this is looking a little bit alien-like, because humans don't have that, right? Let me hide these, and I can go over a little bit more of different shapes. Some other shapes you might consider when you're doing this are the good old circle. And those can be great for characters that are more lovable, say like a really cute, chubby little animal friend or something like that floats. Like a dragon, see? Like a very adorable, cute dragon. Or maybe a circle can even be used to represent like a more large set kind of character. Like I believe in One Punch Man, you have that kind of pig eater guy, and he's sort of a very circular shape, and it represents his kind of excessive eating lifestyle. But it also creates this really interesting contrast to all the really muscular heroes that they have in that universe, right? You might even consider, say, really less traditional shapes, right? Say like an upside down tear or a pear. And then you end up with like some sort of maybe a slime creature that's doing this, or maybe there's like a dress that flows out like this, really cute, like a jester, right? It's also a shape, and this shape just creates this implication of very childlike or clownish kind of vibes, because I don't know if it's just me, but when I look at a pear shape kind of puffed out shape like that, puffed out dress like that, I think like more old fashioned or something very comedical, because I can't take anything serious with like a big rump. Like, have you seen those like corgis with those big butts? That's what I think of when I see this shape specifically. And so what we can do for our lesson continuing on is to try to practice creating character tropes for, say, a lineup for Leah's party. She's a mage, so I'm just gonna pretend that I'm gonna add some more members of her party, like a healer, potentially, a tank, maybe an assassin type, or maybe an additional, like, I don't know, just a regular swordsman rather than a tank. Because when I think of tanks, I usually think they're associated with like big swords, shields, or whatnot, right? And so for Leah, we already have her as a mage, and she's sort of a more longer shape kind of character. And so we're going to try to vary the sizes of our characters to make it seem sort of interesting, right? We've already agreed she's got a cool old cape with little bangles, little strips of fabric flowing in the back. Her robe, her cape sleeves are gonna have like the bifurcated kind of slit. It's gonna be closed and opened up, just similar to like Japanese or traditional Asian style clothing, with a little mesh underneath maybe. Just giving you a quick reminder of how we designed the character last time. And I might have forgotten to mention the reason why I tried to alternate the values between different sections is kind of you want to be able to have a very distinct character silhouette, right? So like when you think of characters like, say, SpongeBob, right? You can immediately reduce him down to this, a darker pair of pants, an even darker tie, and then super light shirt. Right? Even in this super generic, super simple, you can recognize this is SpongeBob, and that's why when you're doing character design, it helps to always try to vary your values in big sections rather than like focus on the tiny details. So your overall design is going to hold up rather than like get too stressed out about how your little ding bangles are looking or like whether or not you have the right patterns of the dress. Again, I'm doing this super loosey-goosey, so none of the proportions are right, but just trying to get the design in there so you have a good reference point for like how else you're going to design the rest of your characters, because you want them to look somewhat similar in the same environment, right? And this is going to be Leah. Just perfect. Perfect. Maybe I've decided I want to do like this kind of bi-parted sleeve thing. I don't know. We'll see how I feel about it. As I've mentioned, you can always change your design halfway through if you're not feeling it, right? Because that's your power, your prerogative. You are the designer. So long as you don't change it too often and make people confused. Now designing her color palette, I imagine that she's gonna have a lot of darks in her color palette, so we're gonna make sure that black is one of the colors, especially for maybe, say, her cape. I know I want red in there somewhere. Maybe some blue. Or better yet, a darker blue maybe? Maybe the lighter blue was the right idea. It gives a good balance to the darkness of the palette. And then we'll just vary it a little bit. There, that'll make her seem more. The light lime green will give a little bit of touch of villainy to her, because I definitely think that with her sort of really angled eyes, very evil looking kind of pupils. She needs a touch of like evil. And that's why you see like Disney villains, they're gonna have like a ton of like lime greens in their color schemes. Like if you can imagine Jafar, his magic is usually lime green. Ursula is usually lime green. Even Scar from Lion King, his whole like backdrop while he's singing about murdering Simba's father is like disgusting, like neon green, like this, basically this color. Which you can see why that I do not like Nike shoe colors, because they're lime green for a lot of them, because I know their reasoning is like, oh, it'll allow you to stand out, right? But it just reminds me of like evil and gross slime. So let's try giving her those colors. If she's going to have red, maybe the red's only gonna be here. Maybe this is the opportunity to finally figure out her hair color, right? We know that she has some bells, so we're gonna make them more of a lime greeny color to match the color palette, but I'm not. Or maybe a more rusted, muted yellow, so they look similar to the kind of faded, muted color palette that we've got going on. And the key to good character color palettes is choosing limited number of colors, because when you start using more than like say 4 to 5 colors, your character's gonna start feeling a little too nuanced, feel very rainbowy, and it doesn't feel very like cohesive, right? So even if you are going to use a couple of accent colors, make sure you're not using it too much everywhere. Like the green, I don't use it too much everywhere. I try to limit the amount I'm using. Let's also just put in a very generic skin color for her. We're going to choose something that's a little more earthy than usual, but super desaturated, just because her overall color palette is sort of very earthy, desaturated kind of vibes. And seeing how her whole robe outfit is like black and everything, I'm feeling like maybe her hair needs to be like a more vibrant color just to balance everything out. Maybe that color, or maybe a slightly darker version of that color, maybe. would be an interesting mix-up. And then do little tinges of that red in there to try to spice it up a little, make it seem even more non-realistic. If you look far away, zoom, zoom, zoom. It's not looking too bad. I can totally tell the differences between the various like sections of the design, which is pretty important. We're gonna try to get that kind of stocking feeling. But we also want to make sure this area stays sort of light to kind of balance out the super dark robe that she's got going on. Unless you change it up, say her legs are dark and then her belt is lighter. No, you're gonna lose that beautiful leg silhouette when you do that. So we're not gonna do that to ourselves. It's too much red now. Gotta be careful with how much red you're putting in places. Alright, I've settled to make it so it's like gonna be a gradation from this color all the way to that. And then maybe she has like some tattoos somewhere in her back. Let's try to map out how her back design might look like. We're also going to be talking about how we pose our characters. And so this is not a good example of posing because you barely tell anything from it, right? So for this one, I'm going to start doing some posing, like jutting out her hips a little bit. So you get to showcase her very playful, very sexy kind of attitude. And I'm just gonna darken the background so you can see some of this lightness a little bit better. Yes. So Leah, you're going to have to be darker so we can see you. Leah. I'm gonna make it so she has this really cool circle symbol in the back. With like, I don't know, some kind of rune pattern that we can figure out later on. Maybe it'll probably be some sort of like plant themed kind of motif to match like her green hair and everything. And so I know we have these two little pieces of fabric. So the question is, how do we attach it to her design, right? Maybe we can make it that part, or maybe we can make it like that, or we can even make it I think we'll have to settle for that for now. And we know she's got bells. And maybe we'll just make this gradient into it so it looks a little bit more cohesive in that sense. And maybe the insides of her sleeves are red. And her powers are going to be green to match her overall scheme, even though green can be seen as evil. Her overall character personality might be like she plays the both sides, right? Like she technically might be evil, but for her own selfish desires, she works with the heroes or the good guys or your team just for the temporary moment. Maybe there's some kind of design at the end. I don't know what it is quite yet, but I do like seeing something break up that redness. You see just how rough we did Leah, right? And so let's imagine, say, her counterpart, right? Or not counterpart, but like her tank, her defense. Because as mages go, even if you're the strongest mage, you're gonna want someone who's gonna be able to go up front. Because I highly doubt she is the type to get her hands dirty herself, right? So we're gonna get ourselves a character that is built strong. So maybe they are taller, are more rectangle-ish. And maybe for his color schemes, maybe he'll be more in the cooler zone. Since Leah was red and green, maybe we'll choose like, say, blues, purples. But to keep it unified, obviously we'll keep maybe one of these colors also in his palette. Say this green. And then we can pair it up with a nice rich blue. We don't know. I might change this color palette later just as we're working on, because sometimes we also make color palette decisions based on the overall, like, what type of person the character is. Like, if they're a huge tanker, you're not going to see them flatten around in pink, right? You're not going to see them hot pink. But that would be a very interesting contrast. You could totally design a tanker that it's all pink, but then you have to be sure that this is a conscious decision you're making, and then you're going to somehow have to compensate for the pink usage by upping on the very wide, very stacked kind of personalities, that traits that you usually associate with Tinkers, right? You know what? Let's do that right now. I feel like that would be a much more interesting way to go about teaching you color choices and character design, right? So if we're doing pink, let's do a juxtaposition of this really burly seeming kind of character versus their love for pink, because they grew up surrounded by 3 sisters, so they have a unfealty dying love for pink. But because pink is such an artificial color, that means when we design this character, we're gonna take the assumption that this is a world that's more modern, more sci-fi kind of thing. Let's choose a hot pink. Hot off the press. And to compensate for that pink, super pink kind of design, we're gonna give his hair color a sort of also similar pinkish color. Right, you can see as a tanker, I'm purposely making his head slightly smaller, making his haircut kind of angular. Also gonna make sure that his skin choice is a little on the pinker side, as though it's like a ginger head or something like that, right? And we're gonna balance these out with not more neutral colors, right? Maybe he's even a cyborg or something like that. Hence why we're gonna get like these sorts of breakage up of his limbs. Bring some of that green into his hair. Makes a very interesting kind of contrast. We're making this arm some sort of gun. We want to keep that shoulder padded kind of look, almost like a football player. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is sort of make it seem like his upper torso is sort of separated from his middle torso, sort of like those weird robot android kind of things. He's gonna look almost like Ultraman or something because of how I'm doing his armor and gears and everything. Power source, power source, power source. We're gonna push down this shoulder a bit so it seems like he's sort of nonchalant by the whole holding gun kind of thing. Again, that's why we're doing such like rough character work, because with this kind of thing we're able to like really fix everything that we want. And we're gonna pretend that he is sort of like a cyborg, so I'm gonna just put in some more tubes for him or something. We're gonna vary the color just a tad bit, not too crazy much, so we don't go like get super confused. Because remember, good character design hinges on a cohesive color palette, right? So you can see like I've really limited my color palette to the two complementary colors, a sort of more neutral color and then a slightly variation of that hot pink for the hair. And you can see how like angular I made some of these forms, right? This kind of his leg, his haircut is very sharp, very soldier like. His overall stance is very pearly, very sturdy kind of thing. Despite his outfit being hot pink, right? We're just gonna brighten up like a couple parts as though like those are the core of his like machinery workings. Sort of a Tony Stark kind of idea, but not quite. I'm pretending you can see all the wires inside of his machinery working. And maybe there's even more like power jumps running throughout as though it's helping power him up, right? We don't know. We don't know how the shape is, but we're just going along with how the overall feel of it is feeling right now. And I'm liking the additions of more greens everywhere. Or maybe we don't do green on the shoulder pads and instead opt for a more orangey red. And he's just holding a big ol' honkin' gun. I don't know how that gun will look, but I'm just putting it in here right now. And then we'll refine the shape once we decided we like it. got like some energy sources maybe behind the back of his leg, hence why he can like zoom real fast, or I don't know. And these like feet are attachments that like snap on. So you gotta have like little divots or something where it looks like it's like a puzzle piece. Being careful not to add too many weird details or else you're going to end up with a really weird disjointed design. So maybe that was a little too much. And we want to make sure we're not too symmetrical again. That was looking symmetrical. Might just leave that there and just help refine the gun just a tad bit. This might be the barrel of the gun. With the bullets and stuff, so that part's gonna have the charge up. Here's the opening. Sort of look like a rifle in a sense. Maybe that's like stabilizing liquid that helps with his balance since this is a super highly power charged gun. Maybe not, who knows? sometimes you design things because they look good with the character, and so that's then becomes the job of you to try to figure out what maybe the story is behind it and then help refine that design, right? Maybe he's real cutesy, puts a little heart on everything he owns. I don't know. But that's like a good general design of this pink, supposedly like tank-like character, right? And you can see how I've used sort of the idea of a shape to help build the personality. This really broad, strong square / rectangle. And then I tried to maintain those kind of edges, really broad, real triangle stance, because the triangle is the strongest shape in the world. Anyway, hopefully that was helpful in understanding how to do some dynamic posing through silhouetting. I think I showed you a little bit of that, but I'll just summarize it up a little bit more here, where basically what you saw me doing was just working like this and trying to pose my characters, right? Right, you can see how I posed Leah sort of real haphazardly, focusing mostly on like the pose and maybe how the flow of clothes might go, and to kind of showcase her personality. And I skipped that step in designing our big old tank, but you saw me initially when I was doing Leah, I did her mostly in black and white. And I think if you are struggling to paint your characters, don't start with color first. Start with like the shadow. Like if the shadow silhouette looks good and it looks like the shapes are very clear, you can really distinguish it. Even if I were to say, even if I were to block them all in, right? You still recognize that this is sort of like a heavy set character who looks sort of like a tank. And same with Leah, you see that she's kind of tilted her hips, so it's going to look sort of seductress. So when you're doing silhouettes, you want to make sure that the individual features or like the important parts of the design are being showcased well, and that it reads as like a character and it doesn't just look like a blob, where if you're typically just drawing a character and designing it and you just put them like hands side by side, like you're not going to see much of the design, nor are you going to see much of their character, right? Like if I had designed my armor man, my tanker, just like this, holding a gun by his side, like, wow, how boring is that, do you think? Like, has anyone really actually just stood still like this consciously? No, right? Even if you're standing still, you're still gonna like tilt your hip or like lean on one side of your body. You're gonna have a slight tilt in your shoulders because you're tired of standing and you just want to get off your feet, but you can't. So you're gonna end up doing something like this maybe. And so in summary, good silhouettes, recognizable even if you turn them into all shadow like this. And so keep in mind of that. And when you're choosing color palettes, make it limited. Try to choose colors that are complementary, either complementary, analogous, or like things where you're using minimal amounts of that pop color, right? You didn't see me use the green like too crazy everywhere because that would overpower like the whole idea of the hot pink suit. And I will see you in the next episode where I will teach you how to render clothes in a much more final manner rather than like this kind of really sketchy silhouette kind of thing that I was doing. But for when you're starting out with character design and trying to develop an idea of a character, I would not worry about all the details because that will really limit your thinking. You can see how I really didn't flesh out the whole patterning thing. But once you're like more into it and you're actually happy with like the overall idea and you want to stay with it, then you can start going in with the details and thinking about, okay, is this gonna be more tribal? Is this gonna be more sci-fi, etc., etc.? Maybe this pattern needs to go blah, 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 right? Anyway, toodles.